to be like, well, actually, you're a destructive fucking lunatic leaving an absurd civilian body count everywhere you go and kind of just stupid and racist. And so like that's broadly sort of the point that he's making. But doing that in this really delirious and postmodern style is what I am really taken with, because he clearly loves Westerns, and he's not making like a bad Western, being like Westerns are bad because they send a bad message or something. He's trying to use the genre to have his point, to bend it to something that he wants to say about it. And I love that he kind of wrestles with the limitations of doing that. And it was also, I think, part of what ended up kind of dooming this to be something that doesn't really work for people, because he's making a Western, it's worth noting, in the late 80s. People were pretty much entirely over them, even like a decade ago. Sure. He's giving you sort of a revisionist, maybe closer to something like a spaghetti Western, when people who were used to getting them at this time, because you could still, like in the 90s, there's still Westerns, but like you needed to be a little bit more classical about it. Like you needed to be like Eastwood doing Unforgiven or something, which is its own revisionist awesomeness to it, but like has a more traditional, understandable style for an audience who grew up on Westerns. And this one is like, no, we are leaning into the surreal and experimental touches that will make people lose track of this sense of history in this this time. Like I honestly view this more like how I view something like Paul Schrader doing Mishima or David Cronenberg doing Naked Lunch, where it's like I am taking this subjective mind of this particular historical figure. Right. I'm rendering that in this kind of artificial way and finding some kind of truth through that, because there's stuff about this that he bends and he speeds up but he gets away with that, I think, because he goes, and I mean, he even said this himself. He's basically, I don't think that like a respectful historical or quote unquote normal way of telling this story made sense, because the guy wasn't that. He was like one of the weirdest figures in American history that American history books would rather you forget, because he's such a symbol of what they actually do and what they actually are, not what they think of themselves as. They think of themselves as a cool cowboy, not like this fucking psycho going through all this stuff. And Wurlitzer mentioned that as soon as he highlighted to him that the reality of this film would be malleable, that it would be like he would be allowed to play with that, he was like, oh, that opened the door. He was like, then we could get incredibly like blackly comic, we could get it really ironic, we could introduce like the idea of certain anachronistic details, like the idea that there's at one point a cowboy smoking Marlboros, which didn't exist in the early 1800s.
when he's on like the cover of Time magazine or something like that.
That was the moment where I went, okay, my God, that's so like Ed Harris pulling up a Time magazine in the 1840s and being like, look, I'm Time's like man of the year for invading Nicaragua. Isn't that awesome? And then obviously building to, we'll get to it, but like there's an incredible, just era breaking detail in the finale of this that I think is just amazing. And it's exactly like the moment in Repo Man where the car takes off and becomes a spaceship. Right. Like Cox clearly likes this kind of thing, but I also like just like that playfulness and that freedom and that bravery to be like, I am going to make something that is going to alienate and disorient and confuse people deliberately, because it helps me make my point that I'm making, which is that this is an American figure and his policy and mentality still exists in our government today. And ultimately that's what he wanted to say about it. And that's also why, people, I think, rejected it. I think there's probably some people, the John Wayne types, who were like, this is an anti-American Western, which it's true.
It is. It definitely is. And I think too, like what he also does is he doesn't stray away from the destruction and violence and just like all of the loss that happens.
If you love Sam Peckinpah's slow-mo squibs, like they're here.
It's everywhere. It like he really takes the time to show the violence of these battles, these wars. And I think, when you mix that with, Ed Harris turning around and like holding up a cover of Time magazine with his face on it, you do kind of get a little bit confused. But I think that's I don't know. I think that's part of it, where again, you're getting into his subjective headspace. So he's seeing that violence again, like as righteous in a way, right? Like that kind of explains that scene where he walks down the middle of the battlefield and feels like he can't be killed. Like he's a god, basically. He's like, I have so much on my side I know that this is our destiny, that I can't, why would I be shot? I'm going to the end of this, and I'm going to, like, my men will be killed, but I'm the one that's leading this righteous, this mission. Just that mix of things, again, of the like satirical element, but then everything being squibs, like chests are bursting and there's just slow-mo, bodies everywhere. So
yeah, I mean, that's what I like about it, is that he basically was like, look, this could have been a history lesson I could have done as like a dry, dramatic biopic. But instead, it's like, this should be a surreal and satirical spaghetti Western, because that helps convey the actual, sort of mythologized image of this guy and who he thought he was. And yeah, do you know what? Like the Time magazine moment is a perfect example of like that. Yeah, like a history buff, a CinemaSins guy could be like, well, Time magazine didn't exist in 1855 actually.
17. Yeah,
exactly. But he's deliberately courting that odd factor you feel when you see that, because it's telling you a guy who is doing this in the 1980s could find himself on Time magazine. Ronald Reagan could be on Time magazine and have a similar mentality and policy that this guy has, and leading us, an army into the same country, whatever, I guess 130 years later. That's ultimately what Cox is getting at. And you can say that that's incredibly unsubtle, and that would be true.
It definitely is unsubtle, but I enjoy every minute of it. Like, I think it's both equally hilarious and,
it's a great gag, and I love